Let's talk about the prisoner's dilemma. Speaking of the humanities, a key principle in social philosophy is the idea of the public good. This notion of the public good is what underpins the formation of social institutions. To understand the concept of the public good, you need to grasp a concept developed by sociologists, the prisoner's dilemma. Let me explain briefly. It goes like this. Two prisoners, A and B, are caught, and the detective tells each, confess. They are placed in separate rooms and told the other might betray them if both trust each other and choose not to betray. They both benefit. Their combined gain is maximized that way. But because neither can trust the other, they both end up betraying. And that leads to the worst possible outcome. They both lose. Individual rationality leads to collective failure. That's the essence of the prisoner's dilemma. Each person chooses what's best for them, but together it results in the worst outcome. That is the prisoner's dilemma. Since we're already on the topic, it can really help you grasp what's happening with Bitcoin and altcoins today. It provides a useful framework for understanding. Imagine a public playground. Now that playground might be taken over by teenagers. Rowdy ones who hang around, smoke, tell dirty jokes, even sneak alcohol, or harass passing schoolgirls. That kind of group might dominate the space. Or it might be filled with moms pushing strollers, letting their kids play, and chatting amongst themselves. Hey, check out this YouTube channel, Wisdom of Bitcoin. It's amazing. They share tips like that, genuinely trying to help each other out. That's also a possibility. But this playground, at one point, could be taken over by rowdy teens, and at another by community-minded moms. When the moms dominate the space, a teenager might show up expecting his friends, but ends up intimidated by the atmosphere of community, so he just loiters around the edges awkwardly, unable to even light a cigarette, and eventually walks away. On the other hand, picture a mom who brings her child out in a stroller, only to find the place filled with tough, noisy teenagers. If she dares say, "You can't behave like this here," she might get verbally attacked, maybe even physically threatened, overwhelmed by their energy. She quietly turns around with her stroller and navigates her way through cars in the parking lot. Instead of using the playground, that's the reality. This is the kind of situation we're dealing with. So the question is, who ends up controlling the playground? This is exactly where the principle of the prisoner's dilemma comes into play. You are all rational individuals, right? A rational individual seeks to maximize personal benefit. They do consider the community, but ultimately personal gain comes first. So maximizing your own benefit is desirable. And if that also helps the community, even better. But if your benefit is maximized, even at the cost of the community's well-being, you'll likely still protect your own interests. That's the fundamental trap of the prisoner's dilemma. Let's say you're a young mother. What situation would benefit you? Ideally, the playground would be filled with other moms like you. Young mothers pushing strollers, chatting, and letting kids play. But you alone, walking into a crowd of rowdy teens. With a stroller, you risk being harassed or even attacked by rough kids. Or at the very least, shouted at. It could ruin your day. Maybe even your whole week. So you wait to see if other moms are going out before you make a move. But if every other mom is thinking the exact same way, what happens? Then the place ends up ruled by the rowdy teenagers. Of course, this works in reverse too, for the teens. But let's not go into their perspective right now. But if everyone thinks that way, then all the mothers fall into the trap of the prisoner's dilemma. And you all end up losing out, because the community collapses. You lose too in the long run. But the worst outcome for you would be this. You go out while the teenagers dominate the playground, and you try to hold the space alone. Arguing with them, your child might get hurt, or you could be verbally abused. Nobody wants that. Of course not. So in avoiding the worst possible outcome, you also lose the opportunity to go out together, chat, and enjoy that community experience. That's why you can't reach your own version of paradise, because public spirit is lost. Public value disappears. The public good vanishes. How do we fix this? A leader must emerge, of course. You know, this indeed happens. It happens frequently in real life. I'm not telling this story just to explain the prisoner's dilemma itself, but to explain a larger phenomenon, group drift, social drift or concentration. That's why Thomas Schelling explained even these kinds of social drifts using the framework of the prisoner's dilemma. He lays it out quite clearly, this tendency for things to tip and shift. Why does it happen? Because people act in their own best interest, even when it leads to collective imbalance. Take the city of Chicago, for instance. At a certain point, as more black families moved into a neighborhood, white residents gradually all moved out. So you ended up with predominantly black neighborhoods, and predominantly white neighborhoods completely divided. Why did this happen? Because many white residents didn't want to be the only white person in a majority black area, just as many black individuals didn't want to be the only black person in a white neighborhood. And that's how the separation grew deeper. Things could have been integrated, and racially mixed communities were possible in the 1970s and 80s, in the city of Chicago, the one Thomas Schelling studied. It was a tense and troubled era, and even today the same pattern continues. As far as I know, Chicago still has an exceptionally high murder rate, higher in fact than the risk of an American soldier being killed in Iraq, especially for young black boys. The risk of being killed is extreme. The buildings may still look intact, but the areas have become jungle-like territories ruled by gangs. So white residents fled to the suburbs, and the city became deeply segregated. Thomas Schelling explained this phenomenon. Using the same prisoner's dilemma we talked about with the playground example, teenagers drift toward time slots when other teens are there. Mothers drift toward times when other mothers are present. So everything is governed by a kind of temporal equilibrium. Because if you go out at the wrong time, you may suffer too much discomfort or even harm. So people conform to the timing that benefits them most. Your greatest gain might come from creating your own new cryptocurrency. You launch it, and people start buying it and praising it. That's the dream of many blockchain startups. That path could give you the highest return. Or you might spot a promising project someone else created early on. And when it gets pumped, you jump on the bandwagon. Then you might make over 1,000 times returns within a year or maybe 5. Massive gains are possible. But what's the outcome you really don't want? What you really want to avoid is buying into the hype and then watching your crypto crash hard. That's like showing up with your stroller when all the teenagers are there smoking and loitering, completely out of sync with the moment. That's how risky and misaligned that timing can be. So for a mother, safety is just as important, sometimes even more important than gain. So she waits until other mothers go out first, and only then does she step out herself. This is exactly why things converge toward Bitcoin. You might think, what kind of ruthless logic is this? Fair question, but this is how the real world works. Everything eventually converges toward Bitcoin because of the prisoner's dilemma. Bitcoin becomes the dominant choice. You might be thinking, oh, Bitcoin has already gone up so much. So why don't we all just join a new project early and try to make that the next Bitcoin? Wouldn't that benefit ordinary people more? That's why some people support things like Pi Network, since it can be mined just by checking in or inviting others. Sounds promising, doesn't it? But chances like that almost never succeed because of the prisoner's dilemma. Don't get me wrong. I'm not here to criticize any particular project. If a token has a real alternative use case, it might have potential. Look, is this your reason for avoiding Bitcoin? That playground is already taken over by the moms, and there's no status left for me there. I want to be top dog in a new playground. I'll be the alpha in this new project. If that's your reasoning, you may want to reconsider. You need to rethink your strategy. If a playground hasn't been taken over by the moms, if there's no shared knowledge, no healthy, trustworthy infrastructure, then bad actors will set up shop there first. You'll have to fight those bad actors, and push them out. But most of you don't want that kind of battle. I once told Cardano advocates, you'll have to go through what I went through. Someone replied, so you want us to suffer like you did? As if I was being spiteful or bitter. That person didn't understand the humanistic context, and misinterpreted my intentions as selfish or mean-spirited. That's not what I'm trying to say. The moment you become an evangelist for Cardano, you're basically walking into a zone where the gangster teens are already hanging out, with a stroller in hand. It's almost the same dynamic. I'm not saying Cardano is run by gangsters. I'm talking about trust dynamics here. Be brutally honest with yourself. Other moms are already sharing knowledge on the playground called Bitcoin. Even if you enter late even if the opportunity seems past, and you start from a lower social position, it's still your best move to push your stroller into that space. That's why we see even more convergence, all because of the prisoner's dilemma.